Golden State Media Concepts bring you Book Review Podcast, a haven for bookworms of all ages and the widest genres, from mystery to memoirs, romance to comedy, fantasy to sci-fi. If you love to read, this is a podcast for you. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Sarah. It's wonderful to be back with you to talk about another book. This is another returning author, as I think I mentioned at the end of the last episode. Kelle Z. Riley joined me for the first time on episode 338 of the podcast. We talked about the first book in her Riches and Royals series. That one's called Read My Lips. We referenced that one a little bit in this interview. Before I get to all of that good stuff, hope you had a good weekend. I had a great weekend. As I mentioned, we hung out with our German friends again. We went to this beautiful beach on the west coast of Portugal. And well, there's a ton of beautiful beaches here. They're pretty much all beautiful, but this one was bigger than a lot of them. Giant waves, not as giant as they will be when we're further into the winter, but beautiful waves, one of which caught us when we were doing what we were not supposed to be doing, which is turning our backs to the ocean. We'd asked our friend to take a picture of us, my husband and I, and we were well above where the water had come and, where the damp sand was. We were well above that. We'd taken our shoes off. I had set my purse down, and suddenly we were drenched, and our shoes were floating, and our socks were full of sand, and my purse, thank goodness, is made out of cork, which is a Portuguese product, a product of Portugal, and so everything inside of it was good. We grabbed it quickly, and everything was sand covered, but my phone is waterproof, thankfully. It was inside my purse, which is also fairly water resistant, and yeah, it was I'm not telling it as funny as it was. It was pretty hilarious watching us all run around trying to catch our shoes before they floated off. All shoes are safe. All socks are safe, just, full of sand. I swear I smacked about 6 pounds of sand out of my shoes after that incident. And it was just, it was a really good day. We had a lot of fun despite the ocean trying to sabotage our cute couple picture. Anyway, like I said, returning author Kelle Z. Riley. We're talking today about the second book in her Riches and Royals series. As I mentioned, the first one is called Read My Lips. This one is called Royally Scandalized, and here is the description of that book. After her father's fatal car crash, Jill stopped believing in dreams, until she became unwittingly embroiled in the politics of the contemporary kingdom of Malesia and fell in love with a prince. But her commitments to her family and his duty to his country stand in the way of happily ever after. After all, fairy tales don't come true in this day and age. Or do they? So that's the description of Royally Scandalized. You have a contemporary romance, you've got Cinderella aspects, you've got some fairy tale aspects, but, again, in a contemporary romance. And you can definitely read this one without having read My Lips. First, they're definitely standalones, but as you read through the series, there's going to be crossover characters and, as always, references to things that happened in previous books. So if you're like me, you'll want to start at the beginning. This is romance. It is, it's one of those romances where it's not a spoiler. They're going to get their HEA, their happily ever after. That's why we read romances like this, right? We want to know that things are going to work out well. We know there's going to be conflict. We know that it's not going to look good for the young couple involved in the romance, but everything will work out in the end. They just have to get over the hurdles that are standing in their way. They have to come to grips with their own internal stuff that is blocking them from having the relationship they need. They have to start communicating with each other. Communication is always a big part of lack of communication, or miscommunication is always a big part of stories like this, right? But I love this kind of contemporary romance because it is exactly that. It's escapist. I know it's going to work out well, and sometimes I just need to read a book where I know it's gonna work out, right? Sometimes I need that in this day and age, in this world, in this life that can feel like a dumpster fire. So I'm grateful that there are books that help me to just go. Anyway, Royally Scandalized, second book in the Riches and Royals series. The author is Kelle Z. Riley. Let's go to that interview. Hi, Kelle. Welcome back to the podcast.
Hi, Sarah. It's so good to be back here with you. I'm really enjoying our time together, and I'm so glad we get to do it again.
I am too. I'm very happy to have you back. And we're talking about the second book in your series. This one's called Royally Scandalized. But before we talk about the series and the new book, if you could share a little bit about yourself for people who may not have heard the first interview or need a refresher.
Well, I'd like to welcome anyone who's tuned into the podcast, and thank you for coming along to visit with us. I'm Kelle Riley, and when you're looking for me, you'll see me as Kelle Z. Riley. That big Z came about because when I started writing, there was another woman by the same name. And so my middle initial for my maiden name, the Z, became a little bit part of the brand. So you look for the big pink Z anywhere, that's me. But a little bit about my writing career and who I am. I've been writing for professionally with the intent for publication since about 1999. I've been doing it for fun many, many years before that. My first traditionally published manuscript came into the novel Dangerous Affairs, which was published by a small press in 2005, towards the end of the year. So I get confused if it was a 2005 or 2006 release date. I joined with a major writers agency back then, and I did have an agent for a very long time until the most recent past couple of years when I've morphed to totally doing self-publishing. When I'm not writing, reading, or promoting my books, I work as a scientist. I have a PhD in chemistry, and I'm one of those rare people that uses both the right and the left brain and gets a lot of satisfaction from both of those. So I have interest in everything from science to music, theater, art, etc. And so those all keep me very, very busy. And that's me in a nutshell.
Well, thank you for that. The series is the Riches and Royals series. This is the second book in it. The first one was called Read My Lips. That's what we talked about the first time you were on. I would say you can read them as standalones. Would you agree with that sentiment?
Absolutely. You can read them as standalones. It's always fun when I discover a book I love to go back and then read a series in order. I feel like I'm getting to know characters that, coming late to the party, but still getting to know everybody.
Yeah, I agree. So this one is Really Scandalized. Can you give an overview of the story?
Absolutely. So Royally Scandalized picks up with the best friend of the heroine in Read My Lips. And Jill is sort of your everyday woman, but when she was young, when she was in high school, her life changed dramatically when her father died in a car crash, and she bears some level of responsibility for that. And at that point, she said, I need to spend my time making sure that I take care of my younger siblings and do for them what my dad would have done. And there's a little bit of a twist to this part of it in that her mother died when she was very, very young, and she was actually raised primarily by the stepmother. And so these are the half siblings, but she feels very close to them in an intimacy and feels that she has to take over for what her father would have wished for them. And while she's doing that, she starts working, and she eventually falls in with a prince from this Caribbean country that I created, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later, who has discovered that she has become unwittingly embroiled in a scheme to steal their crown jewels. And so they are each struggling to find one another. He wants to know if she's wittingly or unwittingly involved in this scheme. She needs to know who he is, and she needs to rediscover herself and her purpose in life when she finds that the plans she'd laid for herself are not working the way she planned them to.
Yeah, and I just realized, I don't know why, it just now occurred to me that she's a little bit like a Disney princess in that her mother died. All Disney princesses seem to have their mother die early, but her stepmother's not evil, so there's that.
That's right. The evil stepmother is too overdone, and I like to change some things on their ear. But I will confess, the Cinderella and the Disney story of the fish out of water and the woman growing up, not quite with that mother figure that she wanted, is something that resonates with me. And so I like playing with it, and yet I like turning it around.
Mm-hmm. What was your initial inspiration for this story?
So, interestingly enough, this story was kicking around in my head for a while. You know, what if I could do a modern day princess story instead of a traditional one? But yet, having worked in major businesses and the business world associated with my chemistry degree, I wanted it to reflect a little bit of what my real life was like as well. And so while I was doing this, it happened that I went to the Bahamas for a work-related reason, and we were allowed to stay in the Atlantis Hotel on Paradise Island. And as I was walking through that hotel, I said, this would be an amazing palace, and I could set this royal series that I want to do here in a place that looks like this. And I think the kernel of what became the country I created and the people started there. And then I kind of throw into it the fact that in my businesses, I worked with many international people and many international customers and colleagues. And so I got to appreciate people from a variety of different cultures. And a couple of my colleagues happened to be extremely good looking. And I happened to find that their languages sounded incredibly sexy, even though I didn't speak those languages. And all of those bits and pieces started going into this modern day Cinderella story that eventually became Royally Scandalized.
No, I like how all the little bits and pieces, yeah, when you talk about that, I can see how they fit into the overall, the story. And now that you know a little bit more about the book and the series, let's go ahead and take our first break of the podcast. When we come back, we'll be talking more about Jill and Constantine as the main characters in this book and what about them that readers are going to like. So stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I will be right back.
Are you tired of the same old news? Are you sick of the seemingly endless political spin and negativity? The GSMC America Still Beautiful podcast is a weekly news podcast covering all the top positive and uplifting news stories. We cover stories that will inspire, uplift, and remind you of the good in the world. Tune into the Golden State Media Concepts America Still Beautiful podcast to get all the great and positive news stories of today. Download the GSMC America Still Beautiful podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast. I am speaking today with author Kelle Z. Riley about her new book, Royally Scandalized. It is book number 2 in the Riches and Royals series. Let's go ahead and return to that interview. In terms of characters, we have Jill and Constantine. Can you talk a little bit more about them and how you think each will resonate with readers?
Well, I really, really liked writing and getting to know Jill. So when I start to create my stories, the first thing that I do is get to know the characters as well as I possibly can. And I go through a mental process of interviewing my characters, pretending I'm sitting across the desk from them and taking notes as they talk to me about their lives. And one of the things that I think will resonate about Jill is that she's a really a modern woman, but she's not sure who she is yet. She has a number of interests and a number of responsibilities that she's put on herself, and she's struggling with trying to do all the things that she wants with her life, and she's really overburdened herself. And at the same time, she undervalues and discounts herself. And I think we as women are still in this day and age socialized to put others before ourselves. And while that's a nice worldview, it can lead to undervaluing yourself and not seeing your own strengths and not stepping outside of yourself and looking at yourself from the outside in. So she doesn't think she's a particularly smart person. Throughout this series of books, her mom, or stepmom as it is, labeled her children, you're the smart one, you're the pretty one, you're the talented one. And it was mom's shortcut for accentuating the things that they did well. But in the children, it became their typecasting, if you will. And so Jill has always viewed herself as, I'm pretty and popular, but I'm not particularly smart. Therefore, how can I use pretty and popular to make a living and get enough to be able to help my family? And so she makes certain early on choices in her life that put her in a position at the beginning of the book that will throw her into a self-identity crisis and quandary as she starts to say, but I want something for myself. I want to be appreciated for me. And at the same time, while she doesn't view herself as smart, she's incredibly talented in languages. And she has this ability to pick up another language very easily. It's part of her internal wiring. But because it's simple for her, she doesn't view that as a skill or as anything special. So that's Jill. And then if we go to Constantine, in royal circles, I think many people are probably aware of the concept of the heir and the spare. Well, my Prince Constantine was the second-born son, coincidentally also half-brother to the older sibling in his family. But he has viewed himself as the prince in the wings, waiting in case I have to step in, and not really having a number of responsibilities until his brother says, I can't handle these royal responsibilities. I have to abdicate it. I have to do it in favor of you before our laws will say it will put my son into the same position I'm in, and I can't do this to my child. And we can talk about the reasons behind that later, but this is something that I've set up. So now Constantine steps into having to pick up all of these responsibilities toward his country, toward his greater family, toward the royal family, or as those in England might call it, the firm. And now he's fit into a super tight cast role as well. And he has to struggle with, I want more than this, but can I afford to do it? Because so much becomes at stake if he follows his heart versus the pre-described path for them. And so in a way, they're both fighting to find themselves amidst all of these burdens that they have willingly and somewhat unwillingly picked up. And I think we all do that in our lives as we juggle wife and mother and person who has a special hobby and working person. And there are just a ton of roles we take on that we have to juggle.
Exactly. Thankfully, most of us don't have to do that in the public eye, as Constantine has done his whole life, and then Jill eventually has to do as well. So I'm grateful for that.
As am I. But I find as I work in my writing career a little bit more each time, I have a piece of myself going more and more into the public eye. And that is also interesting because as a child, I think it'd be cool to be an actress or a well-known author or this or that or somebody that the world views as important. But what you come to realize as you do this, you create that persona doing something you love, but then it truly is the persona. It's your public image, and you have to be a little bit reserved in that because, you don't want to allow your public image to have a bad day, even though your personal self can have a terrible day. And it's an interesting dichotomy. And I think as I have grown in this role, it also gave me insight into what Constantine in particular struggles with and what Jill has to learn to handle as she moves into her role in his country.
Yes, and speaking of his country, the first part of the book is set in Chicago when Constantine comes. He's undercover, but then they do go back to his country, Malaysia. Can you talk about creating a fictional country?
So I am so glad you asked me this. I loved creating Malaysia, and I appreciate that you pronounced it right. I think I put a guide in the back of the book.
You put it in the back of the book, yes.
We had to brainstorm forever to come up with the country name. I remember a group of writers and I brainstorming. But as I was telling you, I took bits and pieces from different friends of mine. And one of my friends at the time was a colleague who was from Greece. And I thought that I loved the Greek and Roman myths as a child. And I thought that those were such fun retellings and such positive stories, at least in the way I viewed them. I said, wouldn't it be cool if I had that as the culture I set my country in? But I had also had this experience, as I told you, at the Atlantis Hotel in the Bahamas, where I thought that would be a great palace. And I said, let's mix these two cultures. And let's take some Greeks that were exiled for some reason that came and settled here and formed this royal family. And then later in revisions, I talked with friends and we said, wouldn't it be great if I could make this cast a lot more diverse? And so I created the Malaysian culture to have a bit more diversity and a people more comfortable with their own diversity. And as I mixed the Greek and the Caribbean, I also took an author's license and I threw in Polynesian and other legends. And it was just immense fun creating a culture from the ground up. And in Royally Scandalized, one of the early quandaries I had is that, and having read the book, you might know, I wanted a term that could mean either sweetheart or soulmate. And I wanted that term to be specific and easily confused between the two versions. And so hunting for that term eventually led me to creating a rudimentary language for the country, which gets explored further in Reluctantly Royal, which is the book that follows the one we're talking about today. So I had to create the country, the location, the culture, and then I morphed into creating the language. And last couple of years ago, I recently met a very talented young musician who got super excited about creating a national anthem for the country. And so he's created a national anthem for the country, and he's currently working to get diverse remote instrumentalists to play it in an orchestra fashion together. So it's taking on a bigger and bigger life as we move forward, which is a lot of fun.
Yeah, that's really amazing and cool. So you've got this story, and then the next story also involves Malaysia. Are you going to include potentially more books in this series? I mean, you created an entire country and language and even a national anthem, so it seems a good idea to include them in more books. Is that in the works?
Actually, that is in the works. So when I first started writing in my first few manuscripts, I would create a character or a group of characters, and I had relatively small families. And then as I read more widely, and one of the things that I fell in love with Julia Quinn and the Bridgerton series. And I read a number of those books. And when I was rereading one during a stressful time in my life, I said, oh, the really smart thing she did was she created a large family. I'm going to make bigger families and bigger communities of people so that I can let my readers stay in the same world for longer and do the stories. And so because I intentionally set out with creating a cast of characters that I could expand, I've been able to expand the books in this series. So at the moment, we have 4 books in the series, and I'm busy plotting and thinking about a 5th book. And there are a number of other characters that I can see hopping off to have their own books. And I've got 3 or 4 other ideas that are simmering in the back of my mind. So as long as people enjoy this culture and this country that I've created, as long as people enjoy the books and allow me to keep writing them for them, I think I will stay creating more books in the series.
That's very exciting, and for people who love series, that's wonderful, because you get to, you get glimpses of characters you grow to love in a book, and then they appear, even if briefly. It's nice to get those Easter eggs for your characters you've grown to like.
Right. I like doing that, and I've got to work a little bit harder at having former characters do cameo appearances in later books. I think that that's immense fun for me as a reader, and I'd like to bring that along for my readers as well.
Yeah. And we're going to talk about the third book when you come back to the podcast, which we already have scheduled. I'm very excited. And I'm hoping, I'm very intrigued to see what you do with the characters. There is the first couple of chapters at the end of Royally Scandalized, so I'm not giving anything away that the next book is about Gracie, who is Jill's sister. And I don't know, you're going to have to work hard to get me to warm up to Gracie.
Well, yes. I will do that for you. I promise. I think you will like her in the end.
I'm sure I will.
She definitely has a different set of baggage, and she does come off as cool and aloof. And the little hint on her is that because she's a geek character and I'm a geek at heart who was a once shy geek, I can help guide her along that pathway to become somebody that maybe people do like a little better than they thought they would.
Well, and yeah, I mean, I might be projecting a little bit too much, because I think I'm definitely more like Gracie than I am like Jill. So I'm sure I'm projecting.
Well, we all bring ourselves to the books, and that's why you reading a book and me reading a book might come out to each of us feeling like slightly or totally different stories, because we have the same plot points, but we each, as a reader, have our own insight into the character's development and how they approach their lives. So exactly. That is, it fascinates me, and I love to hear from readers on how they see somebody and what they like or didn't like, and what speaks to them and what doesn't, because it's not the same thing for everybody, and our brains are endlessly fascinating in how they work and process information and give us an experience.
Time to go ahead and take our second break, but keep this conversation in mind, because we are going to be picking it back up after the break. Stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I'll be right back.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast. I am speaking, as you know, to author Kelle Z. Riley about her Riches and Royals series, the second of which is called Royally Scandalized. Let's return to the interview.
I'm not an author, but I did a lot of public speaking in a former career, and it always amazed me when people would come up afterwards and say, "Oh, I really resonated with what you said," and they would tell me why, and I would think, wow, that is not what I meant at all, but I'm really glad that it came across to you, because we all bring our own stuff to what we're hearing or reading.
Exactly. And that's why two people could read the same book and one love it and one hate it. And it may be because it reflects too closely to your reality. I know that there are some very well-known authors, and when I read for entertainment, I will typically go with paranormal books or mystery books or historical romance because I don't want to internalize someone else's modern voice and have it impact my voice, particularly if I'm in the process of actually writing my own works. So there are certain authors who are very well known and have huge followings, and I'm not going to mention any names here, but some of their stories are stories that feel light and fun and really hit the fantasy world that I want to enter into when I'm reading a book. And other stories by the same person can have a more complex or a darker feel that is just a total miss for the fantasy world that I want to enter into. And so it's very interesting how what I want and what I need for my entertainment informs whether I like a particular work or a different work from the same person who is equally talented and skilled in both books that he or she writes.
Sure. Which actually is a wonderful segue into my next question, and that is, what is it about contemporary romance that draws you to writing in that genre?
Well, I will tell you a dirty little secret, and that is I'm lazy. Believe it or not, I worry if I write outside of contemporary romance that I will incorrectly use a word that I didn't even think might be incorrect, or get a historical, put zippers where they didn't belong. I mean, that's kind of a silly example, but I think you follow along. So although I love all the grandeur of some of the historical fun novels, I really like modern clothing and modern convenience, and also our modern way of being open to one another and speaking about things and not so terribly prescribed by our stations in life, if you will. So that's what I like about contemporary works. And I enjoy reading them for the same thing, but I find that reading contemporary works, again, is a totally different experience than reading historical works that transport me to a different place. So if you talk about writing tropes, the boy next door trope, I fell in love with the boy next door, but that's my reality. And so my fantasy is kind of something else. And so as a fantasy to escape into, that's one that doesn't automatically push all my buttons. So that's a little bit about why I like contemporary, because I like to write things I know, and a little bit about why I chose to create a kingdom of my own or a billionaire of my own, because I also like to dream of larger than life things.
Well, and if you create your own kingdom, you don't have to worry about putting the wrong XYZ fact into your time period.
And it was interesting because I ran into and I looked up some contemporary authors of royal romances, some of which are this light, frothy thing that I enjoy. And some of those people set them in an alternate reality using England and Great Britain and all of that with an alternate reality. So it was interesting that they took a different set of facts and put it into something perhaps more familiar to people, but then they had to twist and still create their own set of rules and avoid doing things wrong in the real world by creating an alternate history.
Wow, that kind of hurts my brain just thinking about it, actually.
It does, but when you buy into it at the beginning and read the book, you have fun.
Oh yeah, no, I get that. I just mean writing it. It hurts my brain to think about trying to merge those two realities.
Mine too. Definitely mine too.
Yeah. So the third one is written. Are you working on the fourth one now? What are you working on right now?
I'm actually working on a couple of different things. Books 3 and 4 in this series are written. And so I'm getting ready to do the releases of those. So I'm working on book 5 of the Riches and Royal series, which in the next book, you'll meet a character named Apollo Mikolos, and Apollo will be the hero of book 5. And I'm also working on book 5 of my murder mystery series, which I affectionately at the moment call the wrestling book, because it's going to be partially set in the world of entertainment wrestling. So those are the two things that are in the creation phase. And we're also getting ready to release sometime next year, large print editions of the Riches and Royals series, which is another fun learning experience. But I think it'll
wonderful.
be nice for some people to be able to have large print hardcover editions.
Yeah. Oh, good. Actually, are there audiobook versions as well?
I would like there to be audiobook versions.
Mm-hmm.
There are not yet. That's another. So when you are a self-published author, you're really operating a small business, and you're operating a small entertainment business with a lot of different arms. And you can either learn to do everything yourself, or you can scrimp and save and you can hire people to do things for you. Because I am still working at a second job, being the chemistry job, I tend to hire people to do things for me, but I still have to learn about those things. So I need to interview voice artists and pick voice artists and learn about audiobook creation, which is one of the next major challenges that I want to tackle. So there will eventually be audiobooks, but I don't have a timeline for them yet because I have to learn an awful lot before I get to that point.
Sure. Yeah, makes sense. You mentioned your mystery series and the world of wrestling. My husband grew up watching wrestling. He still watches it. And he gets so mad at me because I always, the outfits that the guys wear make me laugh a lot. And I call them man panties, and he gets so mad at me.
Well, they do. It's funny. And so what I didn't mention in this interview, and I don't remember if I mentioned it in the last interview, but I hold a third-degree black belt in a karate form, so a fighting form. And because of that, I'm always interested in the wrestling, and I've seen some of the entertainment wrestling works where they go behind the scenes and show you some of the concepts and how they make it work. And so what I love watching is when the hero of the piece and the villain of the piece are fighting together. And what I know from both experience and from learning about the secrets of wrestling is that the villain is generally the more experienced wrestler, more experienced sportsman, and better at his art. So he can control things that look dangerous, but end up being not dangerous and keep everything safe for the quote unquote hero. So there's often that. And many times when you look at some of the stunts, there's going to be a big takedown or something. It's these two people playing the hero and villain character working in tandem as partners to create a spectacular display. And the athleticism that goes into that is in and of itself actually very inspiring. And yes, the costuming is sometimes silly.
Yes, and I agree with the athleticism. Like when I know it's choreographed, but the skill that you have to do the things that they do without major injuries. I know there are injuries, but you do have to have a lot of talent, and you have to be very strong and athletic and be in good shape. So, I mean, I am impressed by that part. The dramatic side of it is the side that makes me chuckle.
And the overblown dramatization of that does the same to me. It's that way with everything that falls in that purview of reality TV, right? And I probably will make some enemies from this, but I'm not a huge fan of reality TV because many of those series are put people in an artificial situation and manipulate it so they behave badly for the entertainment of others. And so the storylines that we get in some of the wrestling, yeah, I find that a bit over the top and kind of sad because they can be mean-spirited storylines. And that is true of many things. And it's even true of the cooking shows, which I do like reality cooking shows. But I know that they too are choreographed and that there are interviews. And I'm certain at some point on the interviews, we don't see it, but the interviewer will say to the contestant, now, tell me the nastiest thing you can tell me about this character, so that they have these created conflicts. Right. And as writers, if you think about creating conflicts, sometimes as writers, we do that also. And it is a challenge not to get sucked into repeating the same conflict, or we have to work hard to keep those conflicts that are common to all of us as humans, falling in love and not sure if the other person wants us or not. We have to keep them fresh and not overwork and make them boring and predictable. And that's hard to do. The longer a series goes on, the harder that gets.
I could imagine it could be the other way as well, that, each story needs conflict. And it would be easy to make that conflict a little more over the top, a little more maybe telenovela-esque. Not that I have anything against telenovelas. I'm just saying, a little more dramatic
Right.
than it needs to be to fit the story.
I find that the more challenging problem, and yes, I agree with you, and I think that sometimes as writers, we go too deep into the internalized conflicts, and I think they're super important, but when we keep repeating and repeating and repeating the same foibles or worries or vulnerabilities that our characters have, it gets to be what one of my colleagues used to call navel gazing, where you're just ruminating over the same internal conflict to the point where, and I found this myself recently, I as a reader will say, come on, get on with it. We had a 12-page dissertation on this same thing 3 chapters ago, and now you're doing it again, and I want that part edited out because we already did that.
Right.
And if you don't rise the stakes and change them on those internal conflicts, it gets repetitive.
Mm-hmm.
And that's me going through a series of books, reading them all back to back, and
Yes.
binging out and going, man, this woman sure likes rose inlaid tables because they're everywhere, or whatever.
Right.
Time for our final break of the podcast. When we come back, I will be complaining a little bit about books, favorite books, maybe not even favorite books that have been turned into movies or television series, and how frustrating I find that sometimes. So stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I will be right back. Pets bring such joy to our lives, and the GSMC Pets Podcast is here to share in that joy. We'll tell stories of pets finding their forever homes, acting in unexpected ways, being helpful, or just being silly. Whether you love dogs, cats, llamas, reptiles, fish, or you've never met an animal you didn't like, the GSMC Pets Podcast is for you. Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast and the conclusion of my interview with author Kelle Z. Riley.
There was a series of books a while back that was turned into movies, and I'm not going to name names, but the first book especially was a lot of internal monologue on the part of the heroine of the story. And so when they made this book into a 2-hour movie, I'm like, it was basically these two characters staring at each other, having thoughts in their own heads. How are they going to do that in a movie? It's a very boring movie, I'm going to say.
There is a vast difference, and I hope that that the universe someday lets me experience this firsthand. But there's a vast difference between modes of storytelling, and so a novel actually takes about 4 to 5 hours to read a 300-page book. A movie takes 2 hours or 90 minutes to create things. So the movie actually has to have a much faster storytelling vehicle and is a smaller piece of entertainment than a novel that is a 4 to 5 hour consumption. Now, if you expand it into a series, either a series of 1 hour or half hour or whatever they are, works of fiction, for lack of a better word, let's call it that, that can be 30 or 40 hours of programming. And there you have to take that original 6-hour book and expand those characters and situations and introduce new things so that the audience doesn't get bored over that time period. And to realize how things morph that way, that really helps us understand why the book is a different experience versus the movie or the series, the visual television series.
Exactly. And it explains why we're so often disappointed when our favorite books are turned into a movie or a television series or a miniseries.
Right. In a book, you have the magic of being able to live inside the skin and the reality of another human being, to look at the world entirely from their perspective and feel what they feel, smell what they smell, see what they see. And those are things that don't translate to a screen, whether large screen or small screen. The screen is limited with, well, a little limited to visual and auditory, and everything else has to be simulated, whether it be with lighting or cinematography or music and the audio in any storytelling that's visual is intended to lead you through emotional segues. So if something is frightening, you'll notice that the music gets a little louder and a little faster, and the tones and the modalities used are a little bit different than parts that are sad. So if you watch your favorite movie without the music, you will find that you don't feel the same emotions. So what we could do in a book emotionally, they have to do by proxy in a visual media.
Right. Yeah. Well, you mentioned the types of romance that you like to read when you're reading for yourself. What have you been reading lately?
Well, I, as you might appreciate, have a lot of things going on in my life. And so my reading is completely geared to be escapist fiction, and I like long living series. So a little bit ago, I finished the Lindsay Sands Argino series, which is contemporary vampire paranormals. Not bloody vampires, but really rather nice people that happen to have extremely long lives. That I think had 28 books or so. And after I finished that, I had to search for something else. I'm currently doing Christy Caldwell's Heart of a Duke series, which is historical romance, some of which I have read and some of which I have not. And I went back to start at the beginning, and I'm seeing characters who I know have happy ending stories towards the middle of the series, and I'm just meeting them in their early life here. And so that's really fun watching that. And the other series I geeked out on was the Amanda Quick Burning Cove series, which is fabulous because it's a little mystery, it's a little romance, and it's set in the 1930s, 1940s Hollywood era. So it's a different time frame, and it's very refreshing.
Fun. Thank you for that. I know you have a website, and you're also on social media. So if you can share the website and where people can find you on social media.
Absolutely. So the website is my name. It's Kelle, Kelle, Z as in zebra, Riley, RILEY.net. So KelleZRiley.net. And I try to keep that current with buy links for the books, information about the series. There's a section that talks about workshops that I give. And so that's a nice hub to go to. You can also find me on Facebook at Kelle Z. Riley, and also Twitter at Kelle Z. Riley. And I have started learning Instagram. So you might occasionally see me on Instagram at Kelle.Riley. I'm still learning those, but I am there. And then there are some other places that I can give you to link in the comment zone if you're interested in my Goodreads page or my YouTube channel. I'm on BookBub and Goodreads and an Amazon author page, of course. Mm-hmm. And those links are also available through the website.
Right. Okay, perfect. Thank you. We've talked about a variety of different things. Kind of, I've brought up some random things for you, but is there anything that we haven't covered that you would like to mention at this point?
We have talked so much. I really don't have any burning new thing except, well, let me tell you, I have been playing around. I don't know where your readers find people or where your listeners find people, but one of the things that I love to do these days is go to Comic-Con style events. I've met a ton of readers there. It is enormous amounts of fun. We take a whole table display. I even carry with me a mannequin who represents characters in my books. We play games, and it's just a wonderful place. So if any of your listeners have a Comic-Con near them or a con-style event that they would like to have me appear at, I would love to learn some more. And I'm delighted to get in my bookmobile and drive out with books and props and games and giveaways to enjoy the con experience. If anyone is in the Central Florida area where I am right now, you can find me at the Daytona Flea Market. And we are out there on weekends meeting readers. And I am next door to a wonderful graphic novel artist who's done over 85 appearances in books and graphic novels, very talented. So we have our own little artist's alley there. And it's all just enormous amounts of fun getting out amongst the readers.
I love that. Thank you. I appreciate you sharing that. And thank you so much for joining me again to talk about Royally Scandalized and the series. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's just always a joy to be here and talk with you and get a chance to meet your viewers and readers and listeners. I'll get to the right word for those who consume the media you produce.
You're like a thesaurus. I like it.
Yeah, your followers. There you go.
There you go.
And I hope to meet some more of them, and I hope to come back and talk with you about more books in this series as we work through and give Gracie a chance at love, and then go on to book 4, which has some really special and fun things that I'll enjoy talking about when we get to that.
Wonderful. I'm looking forward to talking to you again.
Thank you so much to Kelle for joining me again to talk about Riches and Royals series. I always have so much fun when she joins the podcast, and I'm looking forward already to having her back in May. It seems like a long way away, but it's going to be here before I know it. I just know it. So looking forward to having Kelle back. As I said, if you want to hear the first interview that she was on, that was number 338 of the podcast, so go check that one out. And if you like contemporary romance, if you like romance that is a bit of a twist on some of your favorite fairy tale tropes, then you should definitely check out Royally Scandalized, as well as Read My Lips, and the upcoming books in the series as well, of course. So thank you to Kelle for joining me. Thank you, as always, to you, my listeners, for joining me. You are so very appreciated. We are now in Thanksgiving. Yes, well, we are the month of Thanksgiving. We are now in November. People often do 30 days of gratitude in November, and I will say that while I am terrible about doing 30 days of gratitude, I never remember until it's like 3 weeks in, but I will say that I am grateful for the authors that join me on this podcast, for you, my listeners, for the opportunity to bring these books to you and speak to authors and just have a really fun time reading books that I would not necessarily get to read or know about if I didn't have this platform. So grateful for that here in, already November. If you are a fan of this podcast and you have not already done so, would you do me a few things? First, like, subscribe, follow on whatever platform you listen to the podcast on. Really helps us out, but it also helps you. You'll get the episodes as soon as they come out. No guessing. You'll get a notification as soon as there's a new episode. Also, leaving a review is really, really helpful. It can be starred, it can be written, it can be whatever is in your heart to do that day. But if you could leave a review, I would be very, very grateful. Also, social media. You can find this podcast on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram. Hit me up on social media. Let me know what you're reading. Let me know if you've read any of the books from the authors that I have talked to and what you think. I do love hearing from listeners. So, even if you just come and follow me on social media, cool. But if you want to find me on social media and engage with me, leave comments, ask questions, all those good things, that would be wonderful. I hope that your November is off to a great start. I hope that you had a good Halloween. I actually forgot to even mention Halloween. I was talking about the wave. We did nothing. We were supposed to go out with some friends of ours, but Monday, whatever day it was just a very, very long, very stressful day. And then my hubby wasn't feeling well, so we stayed home. It was okay. And that was pretty much it. The dogs were very, very happy this year that all of my Halloween stuff is still in storage in California. They did not have to dress up. I think they were very excited. But I hope that, like I said, you had a good Halloween if you celebrated, or if you did anything. Maybe you had some adorable trick-or-treaters. And as I said, I hope that your week and your November are off to a great start. But as always, and most importantly, I hope that whatever you're doing this week and in November, you are afforded plenty of time to get yourself lost in lots and lots of good books. Thank you so much.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.